The 18 Strong Podcast, episode number 105, with Tom O'Toole Jr., former president of the USGA.
There's just a lot of hard decisions, conducting national championships, writing and interpreting the rules, and trying to execute and governing a game. It's just not that easy.
Welcome to the 18 Strong Podcast, where you get direct access to the world's greatest experts on training harder, practicing smarter, and playing better golf. Now, here's your host, Jeff Pellizzero.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the 18 Strong Podcast, and thank you for joining me this week. This week, we have a very special guest, and it's a gentleman that I've known for a few years and is super involved in the local golf scene here in St. Louis, helped start one of the local amateur organizations, the Metropolitan Amateur Golf Association here in town, but you also know him most likely on a national level as he was the former president year 2014 and 2015 of the United States Golf Association, otherwise better known as the USGA, and that's none other than Tom O'Toole Jr. Now, I can't tell you how excited I am to have Tom on the show this week because obviously the USGA has had some incidences as of recently where, different rules infractions and debates amongst the rules of what's going on in the world of golf and, the Dustin Johnson situation in the U.S. Open, the infamous grain of sand incident with Anna Norquist in the women's U.S. Open. And so, there's a lot of scrutiny on the USGA. There's a lot of different talk about the rules and regulations and, all the different things that the governing body, the USGA, has kind of put in place. And I know that, there were issues with players tweeting about the U.S. Open and different conditions. And so I wanted to bring Tom on, first of all, just because he's such a big figure in the world of golf, and to know him here and know him on a local basis and as a person and a friend of many of my clients and people that I know, but also just to kind of pick his brain about what's going on with the USGA, what's the forward picture and moving forward, how are they addressing some of these issues, and what are his thoughts on some of the different decisions that were made and regulations that are in place. And then also, I just wanted to hear more about the story of how Tom got to where he is, from being a lawyer here in St. Louis. What did that journey look like to get to the top, the head of the organization that governs basically all of golf? What were the steps that took him there? What inspired him to go there? And it's pretty cool to hear his story and some of the local people that were involved and people that I also know and that we've had on the show. And, just to hear the way that all occurred, because it doesn't sound like it was something that Tom set out to do initially. It was just one of those paths, much like many of us have. We think we're going in one direction, and all of a sudden life takes us in another direction. And here he is 25 years later after 150 different events for working with the USGA, was the president and, is continuing to be on the executive board. And so it was just cool to sit down and talk to him about the journey, the golf journey, the USGA journey, and where he is now with his family and things like that, and just some of the great experiences and memories that he has. So this was definitely a fun one for me to do. I want to just say a quick thanks to our buddies over at the Orange Whip for being such great supporters of the show. You can go to orangewhiptrainer.com to get your hands on that little orange ball that you see sticking out of everybody's golf bag these days. And if you haven't tried one, it's such a great device. I get people ask me all the time, Jeff, what do you really think about the Orange Whip? Is it good for you? What's it great for? And I use it a lot for warming up. I use it for tempo training with my clients. I use it sometimes with interval training, just doing some fast swings with it. So there's so many different uses to really get your body loose, work on your speed, your tempo, your balance, lots and lots of different things. There's a reason why it's hanging out of just about everybody's bag on tour these days. So be sure to go to orangewhiptrainer.com and use the code 18strong. You'll get a sweet deal on that with a little percentage off to get your hands on the Orange Whip. All right, without further ado, let's bring in the special guest of the week, Mr. Tom O'Toole. Tom, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the 18 Strong podcast.
Glad to do it, Jeff.
So both of us here are here in St. Louis, and obviously you have been the head of the USGA, have been involved with golf for so long, both nationally and locally. I want to get a little background on where did your whole journey to becoming the president of the USGA begin? How'd you get started with that?
Well, I tell you, Jeff, how I got started in golf. I certainly didn't think it was a journey that would end up being president of the USGA. But I played golf as almost a very, very small child. Probably started when I was 4 or 5. My parents got me into golf, but the most compelling thing that probably angled me or directed me more towards the game was my experience in caddying, and then ultimately caddying for Jim Holtgreave. What was really during the time of his rise and success in amateur golf, and that exposed me to the USGA. And after I got out of law school, and I had gone to law school really to be in politics. That's my family. Both sides of my mom and my dad's family were in politics, and that's really what I wanted to do. Why I went to law school. Ran for office, state rep, the primary the summer after I passed the bar exam, and then won that, and then lost a close race in the general in November that year. Shortly thereafter, in the next probably 30 or 45 days, Jim Holtgreave came and asked me, did I want to consider being on a USGA committee? I said, well, I don't know what that entails. And he said, well, you'd be a local committee person, and you'd help run qualifying rounds here, and be the eyes and the ears of the USGA in the region. And so I was given that appointment that next winter, and that really started my journey to become involved in the administrative side of the game. I was always quick to tell people that, although I played the game at a pretty good level by then, I probably was a 2 or 3 handicap, and played a little competitive golf, played college golf at St. Louis U, but I never played the game at the competitive level that I would have liked. So having fallen in love and started a love affair with the game as a young boy, I gravitated toward the administrative side. And when I got on the USGA committee, that propelled me to begin to work qualifying rounds here, then ultimately a year or so later becoming the official in charge of our USGA qualifying rounds here, and then went on the board of the Missouri Golf Association and tried to get some more activity in St. Louis, which was an area to cultivate for amateur golf services, course rating, handicapping, and tournaments, and couldn't really get that move through that situation, and ultimately started the Metropolitan Amateur Golf Association in 1990. Actually, it formed in late 1991, and first year of service, I think, was 1992. And that really was the impetus, I think, behind me being involved in the administrative side of the game for the next 25 plus years.
And what did when you started up the Metro Golf Association, what did that entail? How was that different than what was already in place? And what was the...
Well, we had the St. Louis district here, Jeff, as you know, and an old organization, that really the organization that was the most identifiable for golf in St. Louis. It was in those days operating out of Larry Etzkorn's house. It was Jim Benson prior to that. They didn't have any staff. They weren't in the handicap business. They got into a little bit of course rating, and then they had a few tournaments, but they were very clearly for only the private course clubs as members, and then players to participate in their championships had to be members of private clubs. When we were on the board of the Missouri Golf Association, tried to get them to have a greater identity in St. Louis, a number of us, Jim Holtgreave, Mike Corey, that didn't work out in that situation. And as you know, Jeff, like governmental politics in Missouri, St. Louis is sometimes considered an outcast. We haven't had a governor from St. Louis in probably 100 years. And so there was some resistance to that. The next step was to go to the St. Louis district and ask them to expand their charter and include public clubs. Their board said no to that, so the only option was to ask the USGA to license another association to provide all the wide range of services, handicapping, course rating, regional authority and the rules of golf, and amateur status, and of course conduct championships. I had started in 1991. The St. Louis Metropolitan Championship was a metropolitan championship which both public and private players could play without regard to their socioeconomic background, their club affiliation. In fact, they didn't even, in the inaugural championship, you didn't even have to belong to a club or have a handicap at a public facility. Just if you lived in the metropolitan region, you could play in that championship. And that was a championship that the St. Louis district was identified as the St. Louis champion. But since they didn't allow public course players to play in it, I always thought that there was a void. So we started that championship, and then there was such a reaction from that. And we were in the middle of these discussions about trying to get some more significant services in St. Louis through the Missouri Golf Association or expanding the district. It just seemed logical that, well, we need to start another golf association, and that's what we did. And that was Mike Corey, myself, Jim Holtgreave, Jim Tom Blair, God rest his soul, were the four that were all on the board of the Missouri Golf Association, and left that board and started the other association. And so here we are 26 years later.
That's fascinating. I've always heard, the Metro, the district, and just to hear kind of the start of where that came from and how the two are different really helps.
Well, it wasn't particularly popular at the outset. There was a lot of
I wouldn't imagine.
But I think we're past that, or I would hope we are, and I think golf in St. Louis has benefited from it. I think the golf in the state has benefited from it. I think the Missouri Golf Association is a fabulous organization today. I think they're better because we started the Metropolitan Amateur Golf Association. So I think as it relates to servicing golf in this region, I think golf is measurably better than it was then, and hopefully the Metropolitan had a role or a piece of that.
Now, when you got into the USGA committee, and you were there with Jim, who has also been on the show, a good friend of the 18 Strong podcast. When you first got into that, and then you go from being on the committee to becoming president, did you have anybody that kind of mentored you through this whole journey?
Oh yeah, you can. I said in my inauguration speech in February of 2014, I said, I had a lot of mentors, a lot of people that took me under my wing, and I didn't mention them in the speech. I said I actually said I had many, and I probably needed more than most. I had people that really helped me along the way, and Jim's one of them. Stan Grossman's another. Tom Meeks on the USGA staff, and David Fay, who's the executive director prior to Mike Davis, and of course my friendship with Mike Davis that started in a buffet line at the U.S. Open in 1990. His first year on the staff, he was the kind of the USGA staff liaison between our staff and the club of the U.S. Open at Medina, where Hale Irwin won, and he and I met in the Rules Hospitality buffet line, which was on the front porch of the clubhouse, which is still there today. And we met because we were more contemporaries. That was my first year on the U.S. Open Rules Committee, and I was 25 years younger, 23 years younger than the next youngest person on the committee. So I ended up gravitating to the staff, and Mike and I met there. And as I said to him when I left office in my speech in February of this year, I said, who would have thought that, that meeting or that interaction in that buffet line at Medina in 1990 would have catapulted into a 25-plus year friendship that traveled the world together, and then for the two of us to end up in this spot. He ends up as the executive director, and I end up as the president. I mean, pretty remarkable, and as I've used the quip many times, you really can't make this stuff up. It's just one of those life journeys and friendships. So I had a lot of mentors along the way, and many more than that. I've often said that Bill Selman, who was the hockey coach at St. Louis U, who I worked for the entire time I was in college, other than my father, was the one most influence on my life, and I still believe that to the day. My dad, he molded me probably to be whatever I became, which I'm not saying is any accomplishment, but wherever I became, it was because of those two, my dad and Bill Selman. And so I had a lot of mentors, but I was in the right place at the right time. It wasn't I got on the USGA committee because of Jim. I was pretty proximate to my academic life. I took the rules exam. I scored high in it. I was just, I'd just gone through 2 states bar exams. I was pretty acclimated to studying and preparing for tests, and I scored well in the rules exam, and that's really what got me to my national involvement with the USGA, where I was, traveling annually to multiple championships and, all the way to Chambers Bay, which was my 27th U.S. Open. It was a long journey that I didn't plan. That's how it would start, and nor navigated myself through it. But got to do a lot of great things in USGA. Very lucky, and then to end up being president was the privilege of a lifetime. And as I've said many times, and with that accolade, probably didn't deserve it, but I got the chance to do it. Very lucky, and I had a fortunate journey in golf, and it's been very good to me.
Yeah, such an incredible journey. Now, as far as the officials are concerned in any USGA event, I'd like to kind of get a little background on what it is, because I didn't realize this until I ran into a friend of yours, I think, Fred Kostecki, here in town, and I ran into him at one of the events. I think it was maybe the Curtis Cup, and he was telling me about the official process and being an official, and I didn't realize that the officials are unpaid personnel that are there. They're kind of giving up their time and have to know all the rules and regulations. How does that whole process work? Because I don't think that many people realize that about the officials.
Well, Jeff, most people that are cultivated to go on USGA committees get that prep or that mentorship by working for a state or regional golf association and volunteering there and working local tournaments and USGA qualifying rounds like a guy like Fred Kostecki has done. And, Kurt Roy, the executive director of the Metropolitan Amateur Golf Association, has done a great job of cultivating new blood to bring people in to assist in that. Because, as much as I knew or know about tournament administration and as much as Kurt knows, and he really is a fabulous tournament administrator, worked for me for a long time, and he's really taken the Metropolitan Golf Association to a new level. You got to have volunteers that help support that tournament process. You can't do it alone, and so you got to cultivate people in the region to do that. So the USGA and the PGA of America as well both use a model where they try to identify volunteers within their organization that have an expertise and an interest and a schedule or time capability to travel to national championships. So at the U.S. Open and U.S. Senior Open, U.S. Women's Open, and all of our national championships and the one at Old Warson in a few weeks, men and women will travel here that are on USGA committees to support that championship. They will pay their own way. The USGA picks up a lot of the tab when they're here. They feed them. They give them gifts, but they pay their own travel and their own hotel room. And they support a staff that will come and try to present and administer the championship. That's whether it's the girls' junior or the U.S. Open. That's the way it works. So I got on it early back in a time when there wasn't the popularity of it is now. There weren't people scoring high in the rules exam like there are now. And Fred's has scored high in the rules exam, as has a number of volunteers that volunteer for not only the Metropolitan Golf Association, but other golf associations here, St. Louis District. Bob Sjogren's been a guy that's been a volunteer for the PGA of America and a stalwart in the rules. He got started with me way back when, but he went the PGA route and has had a fabulous career. They made him an honorary member, a great accolade for Bob. So other than the PGA Tour, who hires their officials, those people work for the PGA Tour. That's pretty much the model in golf. And even if you go down into national championships that aren't USGA championships, like Sunnyhanna Amateur or the Southern Amateur or the North and South Amateur or the Northeast Amateur, that they would bring in people that would be volunteers that are on those either organizations boards or an event or tournaments board, and they come and assist us. So it's kind of the model that golf is built around volunteers, particularly amateur golf. So that's how the path evolves, and we've been lucky here because we've had a lot of great men and women that have given their time to extend their intellect and their expertise to assist in us here locally, and then many have evolved to national involvement. Kurt Rowe goes to USGA championships and officiates at Senior Open and the U.S. Amateur, and I suspect he'll be at the U.S. Open here shortly. It's kind of the path. You work the other championships first, so it's a treasure to have people that can contribute their time and expertise, and it's invaluable. The golf wouldn't be administered without them.
Yeah, I was pretty fascinated when I heard, just kind of the track that people go through to be able to do that and put their time in and get a chance to go and officiate at some of these events. Okay, so over the past year or so, and probably past several years, I mean, especially you've been there in the president's chair, and I'm sure you've had good days and bad days. And recently there have been a couple incidences on the course with replays, video replays, and things like that. What are some of the challenges that you've experienced personally? And I know that, with, say, the Dustin Johnson incident and at the Women's U.S. Open, with the high-def replays, what are some of the challenges that the USGA has faced and kind of are moving towards as far as, looking at different rules and regulations?
Well, that's a lot in that question, Jeff. Let me try to deal with it.
Sure.
To pick a few things off one at a time. First of all, I sat on the Rules of Golf Committee for, I guess, 12 or 13 years. I was actually on the Rules of Golf Committee before I was on the Executive Committee. So I've sat through the debate about things like balls at rest moving and how that penalty should be applied, or how it should it be liberated, or should it be more strict or a more rigid rule. Sat through things like high definition TV. How should it be applied? Is it the quick debate usually by what I would coin as mostly uninitiated people is to say, golf shouldn't consider high definition TV or call-ins. It just doesn't work that way. First of all, for number one, most sports are using it, right? And to a greater degree every day. But there isn't anybody in any field in any golf tournament that wants some videotape to come up after the fact and that impugns their integrity, or which, in almost every instance they don't know about it, but is there, I say impugn their integrity, not that they didn't operate with veracity or with full intent to apply the rules, but they don't want the cloud or the black eye to have won if there was some information out there that showed that they did breach a rule. So you have to take the high definition TV information on its face, and you have to do the best to try to implement it and execute on it. Now, obviously we've made great strides in that area. So now the rules don't apply a penalty if it took only the naked eye couldn't see that there was a breach. It certainly not from a point of view that the breach may still apply, but if you sign your card for a score lower than actually taken, that penalty disqualification, without regard to whether it was high definition or not, we've made latitude in the rules to say that if the high definition is the only evidence that the player could not have reasonably known that he or she incurred the penalty, that we've evolved, or we've become more liberal in that interpretation. The Dustin Johnson rule, Rule 18, we made substantial changes to that and added an exception to Rule 18.2 in 2012. I was in the middle of that exception, which really said that there was only penalty if the player caused the ball to move, and then we even made that rule more expansive in 2016, which said, look, it's just, did the player cause the ball to move? If he or she caused it to move, there'll be a penalty. If he did not, then there's no penalty. And you weigh all the evidence, and if you can't determine it, or the weight of the evidence or the preponderance of the evidence, the standard would be, is it more likely than not? So in the Dustin Johnson case, was it more likely than not that him putting that club adjacent to the ball, tapping twice, lifting it 3 practice strokes, putting it back down adjacent to the ball and tapping, and then raising the club to put it behind the ball to address it, did that cause it to move? Listen, I could come down intellectually on either side of that argument. I could come down on the side that he did cause it to move because under the written decision that interprets the rule, it says, is it more likely than not? It's a precarious thing. Or U.S. Open greens, the ball's on a slight incline. Him tapping the club next to it could have caused it to move. The USGA will continue to look at that and say, okay, is that decision, we with the RNA wrote that decision to interpret the rule. Now that we've applied it, does that decision need some modification? Does this rule need some modification? One of the things I said to Mike Davis after the fact was, having lived through the journey of changing Rule 18.2, balls at rest move, and how were they caused to be moved, I think I might have come out, I wasn't involved in that decision, I might have come out on the side of no penalty, because that's really where we had taken the whole journey of this rule change. In that situation like that occurred at Oakmont, I could argue that those are the types of situations we're trying to avoid. But I think the USGA has done a great job of trying to be receptive, to be good listeners to, we have a committee that has people from the PGA of America on. The PGA Tour has had major influence in the discussion and the changing this rule. So it will continue to evolve, and it will continue to be proactive to look at situations like the Dustin Johnson one and the one that occurred with the high definition for Anna Norkus during the playoff at the U.S. Women's Open. But I can say one thing, that not sitting at the chair at the head of the table anymore, but having sat in that chair and in the rules room for the years that I did, the USGA is committed to continuing to push themselves to make this best for the game and for the interpretation of these rules for those who play it. That's why the one of the initiatives that's on the USGA's plate right now is a rules simplification, or what they're now calling rules review process that the RNA and the USGA are undertaking to try to simplify the rules. And if they can do that to make this game more receptive and more welcoming, and to bring people in it so they can understand the rules, that they're absolutely committed to do that.
Yeah, I think I saw a little bit about that initiative, and I think that's pretty neat to see that they're kind of looking in that direction, looking to help, obviously grow the game, which is the big initiative there. Just a quick step back towards the high def cameras and stuff like that. I realized that on a Sunday, somebody like Dustin Johnson or Anna Norkus is getting a lot more TV time. They're on there, whereas maybe the guy that's in 20th place or the guy towards the end doesn't have the same kind of TV coverage. Is that an advantage, disadvantage in regards to those kinds of rules?
Jeff, it's a point that's been raised regularly in the rules room and in and outside of that room. And it's a fair comment, but I think here's where we've settled on that, although I think it'll still be in the middle of ongoing discussion. There's a cost to doing business if you're playing in the last group of the U.S. Open. I use that cost of doing business cliche loosely, but it just with that position and playing for what's at stake there, you're going to be scrutinized more than the guy that's in 20 place. That's just a reality. And to remove any high definition or call in Monday morning quarterbacking ruling out of the mix because you're trying to create an even playing field between the player in first place and 20th, you just don't get there. This game is a game that was built on self-policing and integrity. Most sports, Jeff, you've been around sports your whole life, but most sports you push the envelope to try to break the rules.
Right.
You try to foul or hold the player and not get called a foul in basketball. Dan Dierdorf told me he tried to hold on every play in the NFL. He walked his way into 3 Halls of Fame. That's not golf. It's not golf. It's a different game. Kevin Slayton, you sound like golf because nobody plays defense. That's the beauty of it. You missed the point, Kevin. There is no defense in golf. It's a individual sport. We have some team competitions. Get ready to have one coming up here in Minnesota in a few weeks that are really fun. And the big parts of our Walker Cup is I don't know how many USGA championships I officiated, 150 or more. Got to do a lot of great things. Got to officiate or walk with every major player that's played in the game in the last probably 3 to 5 decades. But I would still rank my Walker Cup experience officiating or just spectating there as good as anything I've done in the USGA. So team competition in golf is important, and we enjoy them. But it is an individual sport where, no, we don't play defense, but we also call rules on ourselves. And we're not trying to push the envelope to break the rules or to approach breaking them. We're trying to abide by them. And, I don't know, there's just something that attracts people to golf that is why the people in the game are so special. And I just think of whether it's my own personal health journeys, which aren't particularly recent now, but, from 98 to 2008, I had 3 cancers, and the people that rallied around me, and then I think of my little PJ, my 3-year-old who's had 2 major open heart surgeries and 2 major brain surgeries. The people that rally around, challenges in life like that in golf, it makes it a special sport. It's hard to articulate that exactly, but there's just something inherent about people that come around the game, and I think part of it is how we've self-policed ourselves.
Yeah, I would have to 100% agree with that. That's some of the special charm of the game. Is I look back at growing up as a soccer player, and you're right. In so many situations in other sports, you're trying to get an edge up on the other team, or you're trying to hide something from the ref. You look at the classic Maradona hand of God goal, trying to punch a ball into the goal and see if you can get away with it, that type of stuff, which is not what we see in golf and is part of the basic bone integrity of golf. And I think that's such a sweet piece of the game. As far as, when there are officials, because the officials are with the different groups and we see guys bring the officials over to check on these different things. What's the formal process when somebody, say like a Dustin Johnson, sees something happen or the ball moves or whatever, he brings an official over and then, they discuss it. What's that discussion look like? And then what's the process as far as then reviewing and, making a decision?
Yeah, Mark Newell was the referee in the Dustin Johnson group. He was served on the USGA Executive Committee with me. He was the chairman of the Rules of Golf Committee. I was on the committee long before him. But, I chaired championship for 4 years, so you don't chair both committees. And so he became a rules chairman. He's very rules knowledgeable. I don't know exactly what that exchange was, but watching it, I was doing the Fox digital broadcast. I was doing what David Fabe did on the network. I was doing that on the digital broadcast, so I saw it. That exchange was pretty brief. There wasn't a drill down, a lot of cross-examination about what happened. I think most of the discussion centered around, do I replace the ball? The ball's moved, clearly. Do I replace it or play it from its new position? And there was an exchange about that, and Mark concluded that based on Dustin's testimony, he didn't cause it to move, so you play it from the new position. That doesn't necessarily absolve him from penalty if there's some information out there to the contrary, which is what obviously unfolded. But you would want to try to get the referee involved. That's one of the reasons why we walk with groups at the U.S. Open, because we do have a referee with every group. Not all championships do. The Masters have people situated on holes. The PGA of America, the PGA Championship only does that. Like in the last 3 or 4 groups on Saturday and Sunday, I think, the PGA Championship. The R&A does walk with every group at the British Open. So we think it served us well by having somebody there. It helps with the pace of play. It helps for a rules question immediately, and hopefully there can be some definitive action. But sometimes you have the ability to call in for a second opinion. I always called in for a second opinion if a player disputed my ruling, because I just think that's the best way to handle it, not try to be dictatorial, but if I didn't think I had the ruling accurate, then of course you want to bring somebody else in. But if I thought I had it accurate, but I thought for diplomacy reasons, why not let he or she hear it from somebody else? Then I would always was a proponent to do that. Some people, the rules, if you are the referee as appointed by the committee, then your decision's final. But when you're playing in at the U.S. Open, that referee is not so much in a definitive role. It's there for all the reasons I mentioned, and the fact that there was information that came out after that is something that the USGA clearly had to act on. So there's a fine line, but you want to try to. The PGA Tour does this. Those players rely on they only usually have 6 officials working any one of their events. If it's a bigger event, they might have 1 or 2 other guys. But they try to rely and get rulings from those guys because they work with them every week and they're familiar with them and they're comfortable. And so the tour players like to get that confirmation because it's a safety net.
Sure. Yeah, I would imagine it's kind of one of those situations where, it can be such a gray area. It's such a hard thing to make a decision there. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. So to take the time and get that second opinion or whatever you need to do. But I realize that you guys are in very tough positions in those different calls, and so I don't know that I would like to be in the shoes of making those decisions.
Well, they're not. I had a dad who refereed college football. I can remember Pete Rozelle calling our house and offering my dad a spot to referee in the NFL way back in the 60s. And my mom said no because she didn't, back then you had to travel on Friday and you were gone until Monday. And my mom said, you're not doing that. But I always thought that golf officiating was so much easier than that because, if you're refereeing football and you blew the call or missed it, you can't get the horse back in the barn. You had to be on point all the time. You didn't have time to open up a rule book. You didn't have time to ask some questions. You didn't, boom. Same thing with basketball. He refereed a lot of college basketball too. I always thought that was hard. I always thought the golf officiating, while you could be put into a tough situation, and I was put into several during my career, but I always thought you had a little more time to take a deep breath and look at a rule book or bring somebody else in, to try to get it right.
Now, over the course of your years, you mentioned that one of the greatest events was the Walker Cup, and you've walked with so many different guys and met so many different people. Pretty much every major player. You have any great stories or one great story you could share with us of maybe one of the most memorable walks you've had or groups you've spent some time with out on the course?
Well, Jeff, I was so lucky to get to do all this privilege. I mean, to be involved in governing a game that you start a love affair with as a young kid, was really lucky, really fortunate to have that opportunity and to walk with all these great players. And it's just lucky. One of the most often asked questions, what's the most difficult ruling you ever made, or what was the most pointed ruling? I always kind of stumble on that because I don't dwell on those types of things. But I was up Julian, Zach, and PJ and I went to meet my sister in Long Island this weekend at Sabonic Golf Club, which is a site of a U.S. Women's Open Championship, and it's right adjacent next to the National Golf Links of America, and just on the other side of that is Shinnecock Hills Golf Club. So great golf courses right there, and we've become good friends with the Pascucci's, Michael Pascucci, that built that, and we go out on the range on Friday to go play, and here's Jackie Nicklaus, Jack the Second, he goes by, and his son Jack the Third, they know Zach because of my interaction with that family, which I'll get to the point. But we had this exchange with them, and then sat and hit balls with the two Nicklauses for 20 minutes and talked. And now the only reason they know me and they know Zach is because during my time as president, just in my last 2 years, I had the good fortune of dedicating the Nicklaus wing to Jack at our headquarters in Far Hill, New Jersey. That ended up while I was president, we finished that and cut that ribbon. And then I got to give Barbara Nicklaus the Bob Jones Award, which is the highest USGA honor. And, like the Davis journey on the porch of Medina till 30 years later almost, how could that possibly, the stars have lined up? And because of that, I mean, I have a relationship with the Nicklaus family that, I will cherish the rest of my life. My little baby son, PJ, and his medical journeys, if I told you how many times Barbara Nicklaus texted my wife, Julie, you'd fall off a chair. So, those are some of the lucky things that happened to me, and it's just the timing. I was president in the years that we dedicated of $7 million addition to Jack Nicklaus and his accomplishments in the game, and it wasn't even our board, because our Bob Jones Award is not given by the board. It's voted by a committee that's comprised primarily of past Bob Jones Award winners and past presidents of the USGA. So anyway, those two things happened to me, and so I walk on a practice range at a golf course in New York last Friday, and here's two Nicklaus boys, and we had a great afternoon with them because I just happened to have been at the right place at the right time.
That's so great. I can't imagine all the experiences that you've had, both on and off the course, because of some of the connections that you've made and people that you've met and worked with. All right, you said that sometimes...
And one thing I wish I would have done, sorry to interrupt, Jeff, I think I wish I would have done, I'm sitting in my office here in Town and Country in Maryville University and looking at all the pictures and things that memorialize some of this journey, which are kind of in a hodgepodge, and I, of course, have a bunch at home, but I really didn't do a good job of trying to stop along the way and, and memorialize that. I'm sitting there looking at a picture of my son Zach and I on the 18th hole on Father's Day of the U.S. Open at Pebble Beach, and, that Father's Day NBC opened the telecast with Zach putting in the hole location when we set it. That Sunday morning at the U.S. Open at Pebble Beach, and so I got this picture of Zach holding the 18th hole flag with me. I mean, so I have these things spattered around, but I didn't really do a great job of saying, look, I really should memorialize this for PJ and for just my family, and so I tell Julie all the time, we have boxes of stuff. We probably should try to do that because, again, they're great memories, and I cherish all of them. And if you don't leave anything from this interview but one thing, Jeff, you should know that I'm humbled and honored and very lucky to have gotten to do all of it.
It's interesting. You're such good friends with Jim Holtgreave, and he mentioned pretty much the exact same thing on the show when we were asking him about his Masters experiences and all the incredible places and events that he traveled to, and he said he was so focused on the moment and the competitiveness that kind of the same thing, wanted to take a little bit more time wishes he would have taken a little bit more time. And I know that really reflected in his Walker Cup captainship and the things that he does now for the game of golf. So you guys are very, very similar. Obviously, great buddies, but very similar in that respect.
Well, hopefully, humility is a great attribute and quality, and hopefully everybody tries to interject a little bit in their life. I hope people think I did.
Well, Tom, I know I don't want to take up much more of your time. I got a couple kind of quick questions. I could sit here and ask you questions all day long, but we'll just kind of do a couple quick ones with some pretty short answers. First one is, what would you say in your tenure as the president, what was the one biggest accomplishment that you or the USGA kind of made in those 2 years, and then maybe what were one or two of the biggest challenges that you had?
Yeah, I said always when asked the question, look, somebody else will measure or assess how we, and it's a collective we, and I said this in my speech at the annual meeting last year when I left office in San Diego. History and golf's pundits will assess how we did, but I think that we were focused on protecting the game. As I've liked to said, I was always attached to what happened in that room in New York City in December of 1894 when the USGA was formed, and that was to write and interpret the rules and to conduct national championships. I think it's the very fiber of what the USGA is still about. I do think that in that governing role, which is that is the most challenging thing. Governing is not popular, and you can be moving along at a fine pace, and all of a sudden you get hit with a Mack truck. Whether it's a ruling at the U.S. Open or the Women's Open, or it's an anchored putting stroke or any of those things, you can't ever get complacent or comfortable because that's just governing. But besides that responsibility, which we got in that room in New York City at the Calumet Club in 1894, and the additional rulemaking functions we acquired after that, whether it's handicapping or amateur status or course rating, and those rulemaking functions, I do think that USGA as leader in the game needs to be concerned with the game's health. So that's a challenge of today, which in conjunction with the other allied organizations, PGA Tour, the PGA of America, the R&A from our governing partnership, we got to be concerned with the game's health and as leaders in the game. I don't think our USGA's responsibility is to grow it, but we got to be concerned with our resources in its health, and we got to help with initiatives like that, like drive, chip, and putt, and the Latin American Amateur that we're doing in conjunction with the R&A and the Masters Tournament Foundation. So I think that people assess how we did. I think that one of the most important things we did was to grow our relationship with the R&A. We govern this game together, worldwide, and if that is such an important part, because we do it by consent. Nobody anointed us as the governing bodies in golf. We took that on, and golf is a global game now, and the fact that you have two organizations trying to do that, if you had a clean white sheet of paper, you wouldn't start governing golf that way. So when you have two organizations, it's really important that you stay connected, that you collaborate, that you're not always going to agree on everything, but you have to interject that governance responsibility with great dignity, with great diligence, with great conviction. And I think we strengthened our relationship with the R&A during my time, and I just think that's so important. We had the USGA Executive Committee, our board, our governing board, and the R&A General Committee all together in a room for the first time ever in the history of the two organizations, all members in one room at one time for a meeting at the Walker Cup at Lytham and St. Anne's. I think that was an important and compelling day for golf. We published in January of this year a Rules of Golf book that has both logos on it Now we've been promulgating these rules together since 1952. Never before has there been a rule book that had both logos on it. Never before was there a rule book that was exactly the same in St. Louis and Singapore.
Wow.
And I just think for the peculiar way we govern this game together, collectively, and hopefully with great collaboration and diligence and conviction and all the things I referenced, we have to be united, and we have to show the world we're united, because it's not popular sometimes. And so I think those are the challenges that will continue to go on. You know, golf's in the Olympics now. Golf is expanding. Could certain bodies try to criticize or attack the USGA and the R&A in their role? That's why I think it's important they have great solidarity and connection. So I think those are the challenges in the game. Other than that, are just trying to get people to it. Yeah. And those challenges are they're from a time standpoint, they're from a cost standpoint, from facilities perspectives. We've got environmental challenges. We have to sustain the game. We have to try to play this game where there's not so much. It doesn't have to be played on perfect manicured fairways and roughs and putting greens. It's okay that we use less water and less chemicals and try to protect our environment. So those are, water is probably the number one challenge in the game today. We don't see it here so much, but you go to Arizona or Texas or California and other places in the world, it's a big challenge. So we have to be sensitive. And USGA is leading, particularly in all those environmental and sustainability areas, leading with help from other organizations to try to impact and address those issues in the game. But so those were all things that were challenged, and I'll leave my time. I gave Jordan Spieth a U.S. Junior Amateur Trophy at Trump Bedminster, and then gave him a U.S. Open Trophy. So that will always be something that I look back and say, well, that was again just lucky to get to do it.
That's pretty amazing. All right, final two questions. First one, Caddyshack or Happy Gilmore?
Caddyshack, I guess, because I've never seen Happy Gilmore except a couple different. Zach's had it on and maybe saw a couple different scenes of it, but never did watch the movie.
That's great. If you had the opportunity, and you may have already had this opportunity, to walk 18 holes with anybody, past, present, or future, and at any course, doesn't necessarily have to be somebody in the world of golf, who would it be and why? And where would you play?
Wow, that's a tough one. Normally people say, what's your favorite course? And I usually give the answer, do you want steak tonight or chicken or pasta? You could go so many different ways with what's your favorite course. I always said if I had one round to play, where would I play? It'd be Seminole Golf Club, just because, I watched Zach grow up there and, learn the game from Bob Ford. And, it's just a special place that, Julie and I and Zach have been. So I just think it's one of the coolest places in golf. So that would be my last round and walk. If I could play a round of golf with somebody, I think it'd be Jack Kennedy. Just because of, his Irish Catholic upbringing and how he got to the most powerful person in the world. And, he liked golf a little bit, wasn't a great golfer, but played it. That's a really off-the-cuff one. I probably could give you a more a more remarkable answer if I thought about it. But I didn't play golf with Tiger Woods, but I walked with him a lot and refereed for him, and so I played golf with Arnold Palmer. I played golf with Jack Nicklaus. I think it would be somebody that was more, somebody that was a more, I guess, compelling figure just worldwide. Somebody that it would probably not be a golfer.
Sure.
It would be somebody like Kennedy or Winston Churchill or I don't know. I don't think any of our popes ever played golf. So I don't know. If somebody, I think it'd be somebody more like that.
Yeah, I think it's a great answer. Absolutely. I don't think we've had Jack Kennedy as the answer yet. So, well, Tom, I want to just take a minute to say thanks to you for taking the time to come on the show and everything that you've done for the game of golf, both locally and on the national and international level. I know it can't be an easy position to be in, and there's a lot of challenges and accomplishments and rewards that come along with the position. And just have to say thank you for what you've done for the game and what the USGA is doing for the game. And I look forward to chatting with you in the future.
Yeah, Jeff, thanks for having me. I think one of the things I look back, and I'll leave you with this. It's something my wife she said a lot of intuitive and really, I think, great introspective things during my journey. But I say this not to raise or elevate me, but about criticism of the USGA, and I was criticized, and people that came before me and behind me have been criticized. I think my wife said it best about sometime around the U.S. Open, and she said, look, you can criticize, but the reality is the job's just not that easy. And when I look back and think about it, I thought, you know what? There's some merit to that. And again, not to elevate me, but that people are quick to criticize the USGA. They're quick to criticize its leaders, whether it's the president or Mike Davis, the executive director, David Fay when he was in there. That it's not, the job's not that easy. It's not like being a commissioner of the PGA Tour. It's just that there's just a lot of hard decisions. Conducting national championships, writing and interpreting the rules, and trying to execute and governing a game. It's just not that easy. So hopefully people are give some degree of deference because of that. Because the USGA doesn't get it right every time. But I can tell you there's a dedicated board and there's a dedicated staff that Mike Davis leads of 300 plus that are really committed to this effort. So hopefully people understand the magnitude and the volume of the USGA's role, and there's some deference given because of that.
Sure. Well, thank you again, sir. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, great, Jeff. Anytime. Thank you for having me, and thank you for what you're doing for golf and everything that 18 Strong's doing.
I appreciate it. We'll talk soon.
Take care.
All right. Thank you for joining us on the 18 Strong podcast this week. If you want any more information on Tom O'Toole and everything that we talked about in the show, go to the show notes. Just go to 18strong.com. You can search for Tom O'Toole or look up episode number 105, and you'll find all the information there. Of course, as mentioned before, thanks to the guys from Orange Whip. Go to orangewhiptrainer.com and use the code 18strong, and as I mentioned, you'll get a nice little deal there. If you haven't subscribed to the 18 Strong podcast, do so on iTunes. Just search 18 Strong podcast. It'll pop right up. And if you haven't got your hands on the Golfer's Guide to a Bogey-Proof Workout, once again, go to bogeyproofworkout.com. Thanks for joining us on the 18 Strong podcast. We'll see you next week. Train hard, practice smart, and play better golf.
Thanks for listening to the 18 Strong podcast at www.18strong.com. And remember, train hard, practice smart, and play better golf.